Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Key Challenges for the Global Managed Service of Enterprise Technology. My name is Hyun Park, Chief Analyst here at Amalgam Insights, and I am here with a distinguished panel today. As you can see from this intro slide, I've got 20 years in enterprise technology. I've been looking at technology as a change agent for the enterprise for quite a while. My current interests include looking at cost management, looking at applied machine learning, automated account and audit, as well as video analytics. And I have an MBA, so I look at technology from a business perspective as well as from an IT perspective. Today, I am joined by our expert panel, Jason Koenigsberg, Richard Schurz, and JC Van Semayes, as we discuss the challenges of global telecom management and technology management. So to set the stage just a little bit, right now, we are dealing with an extremely volatile time in the world. And a key global macroeconomic trend we are dealing from a technology cost management perspective is shortages. We're dealing with semiconductor shortages, as the CEO of Intel recently just said he expects us to have shortages out until 2024. We are dealing with raw materials shortages, everything from gas and oil and energy to the logistics challenges that are happening from a supply chain issue perspective, where all of our ports are still being held up and containers are not being able to get from point A to point B. We are definitely seeing challenges across the board from a supply chain perspective, which make it difficult both to tactically get the hardware and the devices that we are looking for, as well as more challenging issues around being able to distribute things from point A to point B and to provide the services that we are trying to get. So this is an overall problem in the world of technology that is making it difficult for us to get the services we are looking for on a global basis and to manage costs. And of course, we're also dealing with inflation. We are still dealing with aspects of COVID. We are still dealing with global instability. We have a whole lot of challenges right now. So moving on, so let's talk about some other challenges we've got. Let's talk about additional technology management trends. Some other ones we've seen include hyperautomation, remote and hybrid work, AI and the demands for data and compute resources, as well as cloud and mobility as IT budget drivers. And to start thinking about how these have been affecting the global market as a whole, I'm going to toss it over to you, Jason. What do you think about some of these areas and how they're affecting technology management?
Thanks, Jan. Thanks for the introduction. And I do agree that the challenges, and we're hearing that from the enterprises today, are growing in complexity and they're growing in scope. So, what we see out there today is really the need to really automation is a must today. And we see that obviously the pandemic has, we've talked about that ad nauseum, has an amazing effect on the enterprise. We see it out there every day, right? The concept of AI, which has been a concept, somewhat of a marketing concept from my standpoint, but really coming into play now. Cloud and mobility speak for themselves, are kind of interconnected. So I just see a lot of confusion in the marketplace. We see that every day, and clients are really looking to the experts, right? Looking to the expense management community is, how do I manage this new world we live in? And it clearly is a new world. So that need for, we're terming hyperautomation, of how to use that with both people, process, and technology. I see it as kind of a huge driver that is good I believe over the next 5 years, going to really dominate the headlines. And there's a tremendous opportunity out there.
Yeah, terrific. I was curious if JC or Richard, either of you had any perspectives you'd like to share here as well.
Yeah, no. Go ahead, JC. Go ahead.
No, so what we're seeing indeed is a lot of changes and challenges, as you alluded to in the introduction, that have a clear visible effect on our clients and on the trends that we're seeing in the mobility space.
Mm-hmm. Great. And Richard, you were going to say something.
Well, I think it will also be covered on the in the next questions that will come. But I think you're right. There are a lot of changes in a few years that have passed by the last couple of years, with a lot of impact on telecom expense management.
Yes, absolutely. And then, so moving to our next question, as you're thinking about this from a global perspective, which geographic regions provide you with the greatest challenges in managing mobile managed services? Richard, sorry, JC, let me get your perspective on that first.
Sure. Yeah. I wish the answer was just one region, but in fact, every region brings its own little challenges. They're not all the same. So if you look at Asia Pacific, for instance, what we see there is that most companies are actually letting employees expense their personal charges, which thereby excludes that scope of activity for us because we cannot touch personal information. That being said, there are occasionally companies who do need expense management support in the region, and then of course the challenge there is tied to Chinese or Japanese characters and the language difficulty that it brings. In Africa, I would say we don't really see a lot of our clients having a strong presence there, requiring our support. At least in the southern part, we do see presence in northern Africa, in Morocco, Tunisia, and so on, as well as in South Africa. But yeah, historically, there was a shift in Africa for companies, telecom companies, to offer prepaid services to ensure that there were no collection issues. But yeah, it's really a continent that we rarely get to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, yeah, Europe is different. I mean, it's very complex, fragmented. Every country brings its own uniqueness to the mix. We can also speak of languages in some of the Eastern countries like Poland and Romania, where sometimes all the contracts, all the vendor portals are all in local language with no option to switch to English. So it requires a few more efforts to manage. And of course, we cannot speak about Europe without mentioning GDPR and the data privacy rules that we have to respect, and that have had an influence on how you can do expense management in the mobile space in the region.
Very interesting. So it sounds like each continent provides its own specific challenges, whether it's the complexity and granularity of Europe, the personal expensing happening in APAC, the various different areas of Africa that are providing the greatest challenges, whether it's North Africa, specifically the country of South Africa, or the parts in between, each with its different demands. So very interesting to hear that specificity. Whereas I think that an America-centric perspective sometimes makes us blind to the challenges that are happening on a global basis, especially for American-based global companies.
Yeah, I would say probably the US is actually the easiest region because it's a continent, but essentially it's a country, and it gives you a lot more flexibility. If you look at the operational side of things, there is not much barrier to ship or manage something from the East Coast to the West Coast or vice versa. But if you're looking then at managing equipment in Europe, and you want to start sending equipment across borders, it becomes a lot more complex and challenging to centralize.
Great, thanks. Next question. Which geopolitical and strategic issues are affecting global mobile managed services the most in 2022? Richard, I'll toss this one over to you as a starting point. We hinted at them just a little bit at the beginning, but I'm curious what's top of mind for you.
Thanks, Jan. One of the developments that is affecting telecom expense management is a decrease in the usage cost. And the last few years, we've seen two major reasons for this development. One is the use of communication applications like Teams, Zoom, and others. And the second is the COVID pandemic, but then more as an accelerator of the use of the applications. Nowadays, most common way of communication internally with colleagues and with your main business partners is starting a team calls on your laptop or your mobile device instead of making an old-fashioned telephone call. And therefore, the use of business mobile phones is more focused on mobile email and the communication applications like Teams. The effect of using the applications and the decrease of usage costs has been accelerated by the COVID period that, let's hope, lies behind us. But however, we expect that the changes that we have seen will remain intact. An example is working from home. Working from home is more common and widespread among office workers than it was before COVID. More and more we see the option to work from home for about 20–40% of the time is included in employee contracts. And with less travel time, also the need of a company-paid mobile phone is decreasing. Speaking about company-owned mobile phones, this was quite common in Europe, and this has also been changing. The need for a company phone is decreasing, and you see that buy your own devices also in Europe is increasing impact. Another impact of COVID was I can clearly say the fact that roaming disappeared. Nobody was traveling, so roaming charges dropped with 70–90%. There were less travels to clients and partners, and we expect that will not get back to the level that it was before the COVID period. So in the long run, we have seen a big decrease in the usage cost, and we expect it to go up again a little bit, but not to the level of before COVID.
Right. It seems like you're going to be challenged not just with dealing with cell phones and smartphones, but with other devices that are now taking on either soft phone or other tasks that have traditionally been in the mobility space and in the telecom space.
No, exactly. It's more data-based and no usage charges. It's also will mean that because of the decrease in the overall cost for mobility for the old-fashioned mobile phone, so to say, companies will not treat this as one of the top priorities on their action list. But nevertheless, mobile management is still an important way to reduce the cost and also to keep the costs on a low level. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's I want to stress that it is still important and it will remain important, but the focus can be a little bit off that topic because of the drop in the cost of the last 2–3 years.
Okay, great.
Another point was, and already JC mentioned this already, in Europe we see the growing awareness of data privacy. You might know about GDPR regulations that are mandatory in Europe. Especially when a US-based organization wants to sell or implement services in Europe, expect data privacy, data security, and GDPR to be an important topic. So find out what the company culture is, what the company policy is on data privacy and data security before starting implementing, because in some cases you really need to have your approval from a local data privacy officer or sometimes even works council, and they might require more visibility than only the information about what kind of data you're using. They also want to know what are you using the data for, and for what aspects will you not use the data, to make sure that they have a safe feeling about the data privacy.
Yes, great point, especially as the GDPR fines start making headlines more and more frequently. Yes. So let's move to our next question. see, what does your organization do to manage and rank carrier relationships? On a global basis, I think this is increasingly challenging. In the US, we just have our big three, but obviously as you go from country to country, this becomes extremely challenging to manage on a global basis. So I'm gonna start with Jason and then move around the virtual room, as it were.
Yes, thanks, John. Yeah, so I think this is a very interesting question. I think it goes back to what we're talking about before with some of the topics is not only, and I'll kind of ducktail a little bit, Richard said, mobility is really expanding into mobile data, right, with SD-WAN, and there's a lot of movement in that area. So again, part of the challenge in telecom in general is it's not regulated. There's no standards, right? So what we're starting to do here, and I think it's kind of the best practices that I'm trying to roll out here as a team, is start to understand where is most of the spend coming from? Where are the carriers most advanced? And start to rank those carriers with the enterprises help to understand where do we want to attack first? Where do we get most of our benefit from cost savings, from the whole life cycle management? And that process of ranking them is understanding the carriers and working together. And as a team, we've been doing that, kind of looking at the global market and saying, where do we want to go first, second, and third? And then automating those carriers, right? Using what we're calling the hyperautomation, using RPA technology, using APIs where necessary, but really trying to get the full picture, because the mobile providers provide that full suite, right, for themselves, of invoicing, of inventory, of provisioning, right, of statusing the portal. So we've done a job where we think is the key is the data source is the carrier. And we are working as an outsourced team to work with those carriers because they want to work with us, because the easier they make it for the enterprise, the more business we could bring to the carrier, and the easier, the more transparency we see, back to the enterprise. So this is a very important thing. Again, sometimes overlooked. I don't see a lot of people talking about it, but what we're doing is putting a very strategic plan in place to start hitting the top carriers globally, right? And continue to go, with the goal of having every carrier automated, right? And understand how to map those carriers, because that is the source of truth. So it's an interesting question that was brought up. That's, to me, the best practices. And then we could bring that knowledge to all the enterprises when they say the different regions, like how do you do this in Asia Pac? How do you do this in Europe? As we spoke about the complexity, Latin America, very much akin to Europe. There's a lot of carriers, a lot of new carriers coming into play. So that's how we're handling today. And I think it's kind of an interesting approach to where we're seeing the market go.
Great. So that automation across all of the carriers to be able to support global environments seems to be important from your strategic perspective.
100%.
Mm-hmm. And just curious, Richard, if you had anything to add to that.
No, I think it's important to automate the processes to make it less manual as possible. What I want to stress is the importance to have and build a relationship with your carrier. You are a business partner. Make sure they want to help you. And the first part, the implementation part, is always the most difficult part. Jason also mentioned the mapping part. That's a part that somewhere you have to do it yourself. And if it's built, if you have the knowledge, then you can automate it. But this is an investment that you have to make to get more visibility on the main carriers worldwide.
Great, thanks. Next, let's take on support challenges. So how do you support global telecom support challenges across all languages and regions? Obviously, huge challenges when you move beyond one standard language. And I'll toss this one over to JC to start with.
Yeah, so I briefly touched on that on the geographical question. Of course, we're looking at diversity of languages that we need to be able to deal with. Mm-hmm. The way we address that is using multiple things. I personally majored in translation a while ago, so the topic is dear to my heart. But what I can say is that in the last 20 years, there has been a huge improvement in the AI around language translation. In the past, if you wanted a good laugh, you would put a text in, you'd look what would come out in another language, and it wouldn't make sense. It's no longer the case. You have to find another source of good time. Today's you can really start to use this tool and embed this tool in your technology to get a level of translation that is decent enough that you can start from there. You have to combine that with the human eye as well, usually for contextualization, right? Those tools are good, but what they sometimes forget is what is the context of the stuff I'm translating. And therefore, they will give you the first option in their list, which doesn't necessarily match what you're trying to convey to the customer in the platform or in a report. So combine technology, AI, local expertise. You can't go around that. Some things are very specific to a given vendor or a country. And once you cracked the code, then you can automate and build workflows around it that will make it easier for all the subsequent users, either internally in the expense management side, or on the receiving end, because we will have normalized the data coming in various languages into a uniform language that everybody understands afterwards.
So JC, with every company obviously has limited resources to do this. So do you tend to suggest having a help desk in multiple languages, or setting up a corpus of knowledge in a set number of languages to help with support, or using a general language AI tool? What tends to work best as a starting point, or from a practical perspective?
Yeah, even though I got one request this week, I would say that we see less and less the need to really have multi-language support for end users. I think we can say that English is really predominant in most large multinationals, which are the type of clients that we support. So once we've done that upfront effort to translate everything to that universal telecom language I was talking about, then makes it a lot easier to digest. So I personally would not recommend it just from a cost perspective, right? If you want to run a help desk for your clients in 6 languages, well, you need to ensure that every language is covered by a real minimum of 2 or 3 people. But then if the volume is not there, it doesn't pay for the cost of building this multi-language support. Now, again, AI has gone a long way there, where you can have a certain degree of bot and built-in knowledge base that you can use to interact with your end users. That can help. It's still feasible, but are you willing to pay the price for a multilingual support? That is the question. Now, at the end of the day, for us, sometimes we don't have the choice, because some of the portal of the vendors that we work with, as I was mentioning earlier, are only in the local language. So we need to build the automation, understanding what's on the screen. But once it's automized, the bot reads it and it's flowing through naturally.
Interesting. So both that need for automation. It sounds like if you do want to go multilingual with support, really invest in that second language, or honestly don't bother, because English is a business lingua franca at this point.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Moving to the next question, getting a little more tactical. How do you go from a global perspective to manage the different types of invoices you get from all of your carriers? And I'm going to start with Jason here, and might tap Richard as a follow-up.
Yeah, no. I think this is again, this is all related to what we're speaking about, right? As you can see, the theme is kind of the same, right? Really, how do we do that? It goes back to prioritize the vendors, right? You really, this is work. And I think one thing that is interesting, where I think the industry as a managed service needs to come back together, because we need to do this in a single source of truth, right? How you do that, how you map the vendors, right? How you deal with the different language. To JC's point, the AI has come a long way. The portals are becoming, I was talking to someone the other day. If you go back 10 years, the portals weren't there. The portals are there. Everything's moving to the self-service, right? The carriers don't want to have help desk. They don't want account managers. They want it to be managed. So what this is really having a very tactical, methodical approach and be able to map these vendors in a way that brings the data back in a way that is usable, right? And then we can manage that data. So it goes back to the same theme, using technology, using RPA, using the concept of hyperautomation, right? And able to map these vendors, keep this change management process. Once we've mapped them, there's a change management process to understand, right, what level of change, when change happens, identifying it in the moment is key, right? Not a month later. So when a change happens to a portal, right, you need to be real time and understand that and just continue to map that. And that will become the source of truth, right? What we call the concept of CMDB, right, of the inventory and that change management process. So to us, that's the process we've taken on. We think it's the best practice, because without that data, really nothing else matters. All the reporting, the analytics don't work unless I have that core data. So for us is that process of doing it one by one, carrier by carrier, having the experts put together. I call it the expert workers, right? But transforming that expert workers from a BPO model into an automation model.
So it sounds like there's always this constant race to get all of those changes in before the next month of invoices has to be processed. So how are you able to manage that level of volume?
Yeah, and that's interesting, because we've created a operational center around RPA. And how you do it is, as I said, it can't wait a month. It has to happen when something breaks. So that change management process is one of the key kind of factors here of putting the automation in front and the people behind it, that I can make those changes in real time, right? And not having a person, an expert worker with a spreadsheet, right? Remove the spreadsheet, right? Remove that process. So having that ability to go and understand the vendor, and then when things change it in real time. That's the only way to do that. It's the only way this could work, and the only way this could scale, right, and integrate into the enterprise and provide that data that the enterprise is so desperately looking for.
Great. And I was just wondering, Richard, when you think about this challenge, are there long tail challenges or niche issues that might come into play as well from managing all the invoices that you get around the world?
Oh, I think the first challenge is always to get the first invoices. And if you have the first invoices, you will get the second and the third. But you have to set up the process. And that needs to be consistent. So if you have the possibility, what we do for most vendors, we do not only download the PDF invoice, but we only download the data behind it. And that data is normally more consistent, so to say, because it comes from the vendor billing system, and they don't change that every 10 years. But the look and feel of an invoice might change every few years. So it helps with consistency and less changes in the automation that Jason is mentioning. So that's something that we always try to find the most consistent way of getting the invoices in. Make sure the mapping is set. Make sure that the automation knows how to treat the data that is received. And as long as there are no changes, it's an automated process, and there are no manual interference anymore.
So that focus on foundational data and really having that set up as a starting point is an important place, important for a global environment.
Yeah. And luckily, we don't receive that much paper invoices anymore, which was pretty standard in the past. But if you have 2,000 lines and at a vendor, you might have a paper invoice on your desk of 5,000 pages. That's not nice to work with, but that does not happen anymore.
Great. It only took us a couple decades into the 21st century to get there.
Exactly.
I'll move to next question. From a reporting perspective, when we're thinking about our executives, our managers who are involved in managed services, what reports and information do your management and executive stakeholders request for mobile managed services? And JC, I'll start with you on this one.
Yeah, it really depends where the executive is coming from, or what area of the business the manager is in charge of, and then you see the full spectrum. If you're dealing with a manager of the team doing procurement on the client side, they want more live statistics around the procurement activity, the transit and the delivery times of the devices, the pickup rates of the transactions that are sent. But if you're dealing with purchasing, they'll be interested about the usage to right size the contract that they're negotiating with the vendors. They will want to know, okay, what's my roaming cost in zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, and so that they can really right size, because we see a lot of procurement buying unlimited. That's really easy, but then it doesn't really match the needs of every user. So reporting can help. The higher up the chain you go, the more precise the data that they want is. They essentially look at what is my ROI. The rest is all detailed. So how are we trending in terms of spend? Is it going down? What have you helped us achieve in terms of savings through the automated auditing of the invoices through the contract that are uploaded in the platform? Things of that nature. Now, of course, on the assigned side, you have the Power BI fully integrated with the platform. That opens up, virtually any report possibility. Once you've absorbed the invoice and usage and files information that Richard was mentioning, you build natural tables that contain all the information. Once you have it, you combine that with a reporting tool, and there is virtually no limit to what you can report on.
Sure. And just to follow up on that, when you are providing reports for executives, are they basically just looking for a high-level trending view, or do they want to be able to dig down into any of the operational or cost aspects of the reporting as well?
So, Richard, JC, I think that what we're seeing, to go what JC is saying is that it depends on the user. What we're seeing is a demand, and the demands vary greatly across the enterprise. Because once that goes back to the same thing. If I could get the data into the system, break down the data sets, right, push it into Power BI, which is an amazing tool, right? The different stakeholders have different demands, and what we want to be able to do is provide, right, what the stakeholder wants, right? It could be high level trending reports. It could be very detailed usage reports, right? Depending upon what that is and how we do it. So what we want to do is bring all the data into the system, right? Bring it in and then bring that data in and then provide to the enterprise. What I see is a multitude of needs and requests that are never ending, because once they have the data, they want to then manipulate that data and then combine that data. The other thing we're seeing is a combination of data, right? Because it's not just our data. They want to use that data internally with their internal tools, right? And even as granular of seeing that how long it takes from when you provision a line to when the line is fulfilled. So all those data points really matter to the enterprise. That's what I'm seeing out there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Let me move to the next question. So what have you been able to automate in your enterprise technology management across invoices, payments, inventories, service orders? We've talked a little bit about automation in some of these specific areas, but broadly speaking, when you're thinking about technology management, how much of this really can be automated in what has traditionally been a job that you've honestly we've thrown people at. Jason, I'm curious on your perspective here.
So I have a very unique perspective on this because I'm a big, obviously, proponent of technology. I believe we could automate all of it, right? And I say that in a very humble way, understanding that is a journey, right? This is a continuum. All things that have to do with invoicing, payments, inventory, and order management is something that, as a whole, no one would say we shouldn't automate, right? Everybody would agree. So part of the journey we're taking on is to, where is that theoretical limit? I don't know if it's 100%, but I do think it's pretty close to that. So the key is in the upfront investment and be able to build that and integrate that from as you said, a traditional kind of BPO model to an automation model. And what we're doing here, what we're doing with the CBI team, we've put together I think the expert workers, right, who are out there who really understand what to do and working with the automation, right, not against it, together with it. We are really tackling, right, vendor by vendor, right, service by service in order to do that. And I do believe, and I think we're getting there much quicker. I think COVID has accelerated this. The enterprises are pushing for this. And it's a journey to get there where I think at some point, let's say we could get to 99% automation, right? And that allows for integration of a whole bunch of things. But it really is taking a forklift shift in mentality, right? And be able to take that expert worker and put that into an RPA solution and hyperautomation solution. But like I said, there's no delusion. It is a journey and we're working on it. And we have put together an amazing team who really understand the nuances and then what to do. And then from there, it's just kind of tackling it step by step.
Sure. Richard, I'm curious what you run into here as you work on this automation and start working with people to make this happen.
I think it's what Jason said, and especially you have to make an investment, and it is a change in the way you have to think about certain things. But if everything is set up, if everything is standardized and normalized, then the automation can do its thing, and then you start to get the benefits of less manual labor, more in-time delivery of information. But it's a shift, and you need to invest a little bit in setting it up. But as long as it runs, then or as soon as it runs, then you get the benefits of less manual things, less delays. Information is available at the moment that you need it, instead of a week after you've asked for it. So that's a big improvement.
Great. And then finally, let's take on what can be automated and what can be overseen by a human. Jason, I know you said everything can be automated, or we should work towards that goal. And I'm curious, is that what you currently try to do, or is that something that you see as a goal for the future?
No, I clearly see it as a goal for the future. I do think it's people process technology, like an old phrase that will never go away, right? RPA is a very complicated process, right? We've operationalized it. We have human beings behind that, right? Because I don't think that you cannot just do this with automation alone. So I think like I said, I use the word continuum. It's a best practice. How do we create the best practice to order? How do we create the best practice for inventory? How do we do that? And that is kind of taking what I call a next generation managed service, right? That is putting automation at the front, right? With people behind it, as opposed to the opposite, people up front with some automation behind it. So I would propose, changing the perception, right, of what's out there today, and creating a digital managed service, right, a next generation managed service that really the people will go away, but the people will be there doing higher level functions, right, and everything we could automate, and every new challenge we come up against, we could automate. And what Richard said with Jason, it's a journey, right? This isn't, we're just going to start and wave our magic wand and it's going to work. But I think that it takes a different mindset where you're putting the technology first and then the people to back that up, and use the expert workers, right, to do it, because you can't have one without the other. And I've learned that the hard way, right? We're going through the trenches and building this. But the end result is just a much better process in this technology expense management industry. We've been in a long time. It's really been a people first industry. I believe we're ready now, and timing is everything, to make it a technology first industry with people behind it. And there's just an amazing opportunity for globalization and centralization, and finally giving the enterprise what they've been asking for 20 years.
Yeah, and I know you're JC. I know you're trying to create a productive and automated environment, but what do you see as being necessary from an oversight perspective and approval perspective, governance perspective, that still requires some level of human interaction?
Well, first, it's still the human that determines the prioritization of these steps. Jason was talking about a journey. There are countless number of vendors out there with whom our clients interact that we need to integrate. So we have to be pragmatic about it and prioritize. The 80-20 rule. Which carriers are we seeing with the majority of our clients? Well, then let's just focus on those first, because all the others may be unique occurrences, right? So we have to focus on that, and that's still determined by the strategy and the logic. It's an interesting balancing act between the technology and then the human worker behind, feeding the tool and building the intelligence in the tool.
Mm-hmm.